Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So it's Danielle here like I promised, and I wanted to touch base some more about CVS and HG. So this might be a 2 or 3 part video just depending on how long I can record at a time with my daughter. So I wanted to start by talking about my second pregnancy with my daughter in 2017. So my first hospitalization with her was at 6 weeks pregnant, and that's when they placed the PICC line on me. And I was in the hospital for a week because they could not control the nausea vomiting and decided to place the PICC line. And so I agreed to it, and my doctor told me, you are too high risk for me. I'm going to send you to another doctor, and they're going to send you to a specialist. So they did that, and the specialist hospitalized me the following week again to remove my PICC line because of the chances of infection with a PICC line with pregnant women. So I was hospitalized again, had the PICC line removed, was weaned off the steroids that I was on and everything else. So I was released from the hospital with nothing that time. They were in the process of trying to get me a Zofran pump, but because insurance was being a pain, I didn't get a Zofran pump. So I went back to that doctor 2 weeks later, and I was so bad off because I still couldn't eat or drink nothing, that they readmitted me to the hospital and placed a feeding tube on me. And I had that feeding tube in for less than a week before I threw it up. And I wasn't NPO or anything like that. They told me to try to drink as much as I could because the feeding tube was going to give me nutrition but not a lot of hydration. And I took a sip of water and threw up my feeding tube. So that I had to go to the hospital in the valley for that. And they pulled my feeding tube, placed another feeding tube, and released me. So I had that feeding tube for less than a week, and I threw that one up too. And that happened with all of them. Like within a week, I had thrown them up, and I went through 4 or 5 of those. So finally, after my third feeding tube, the insurance finally approved a Zofran pump for me. And if you don't know what a Zofran pump is, all it is it's like a port for insulin. It goes onto your stomach and can go on the back of your arm. It can go on your thighs. It can go anywhere. But it pumps anti-nausea medication into your body. And it's supposed to help the nausea. And it didn't help me. It didn't help me at all. But I needed some kind of relief. And after I threw up the final feeding tube, the doctor said that they weren't going to give me anything else unless it got so bad that I needed a tack line. So I went, I think 3 weeks without anything, and I actually ended up going to the hospital, into the ER, because my legs turned blue and stopped working. I couldn't move my legs at all. So I went into the hospital. The hospital here transported me to another hospital in the valley, and they actually from there placed a tack line on me and started me on TPN because I had such a severe case of malnutrition, my legs would not work. So that's how I got the tack line, and I ended up on TPN, which is liquid nutrition for those who don't know, for 6 months. And because I was on the TPN for so long, I actually developed gestational diabetes. And I was 36 weeks pregnant with my daughter, and they told me at 37 weeks they were going to go ahead and deliver her via C-section because they didn't want to start me on insulin so late into the pregnancy because she was already a 7-pound baby. So we ended up doing that, and I ended up having my tack line removed the day after I had the baby, and they had to remove it through surgery. I went under and everything, and I had an infection in my tack line that I ended up having to be on IV antibiotics for 2 or 3 days. I was in the hospital for 3 days after having my daughter, and in those 3 days, I was still vomiting. I could not control it. And then about 2 weeks later, I ended up in my doctor's office again, letting her know what was going on. And at that point, she's like, they didn't know what to do. They thought it was a hormonal imbalance. So I ended up having a hysterectomy to correct this hormonal imbalance, and it turned out to not be a hormonal imbalance. But it was fine because I wanted the hysterectomy anyways. I had already had my tubes tied during the C-section. They told me that if I had another baby, it could possibly kill me. So I was fine with having a hysterectomy anyways. But so it turned out to not be a hormonal imbalance, and then they started exploring the possibilities of CVS. And with CVS, it is an unexplained condition that causes you to vomit multiple times and have episodes of where you can vomit up to 100 times in a day. And I was throwing up so much. I actually had a feeding tube placed since I've had my daughter because my episode had gotten so bad. So I ended up having a 3-week episode one day, and I went to the hospital. I had been to the hospital many times for dehydration, but that was the first time they had noticed that I was having malnutrition as well. So they placed a feeding tube on me. And this was like 9 months after my daughter was born. Ended up having to put a feeding tube in me, and I had that in for 6 weeks before they pulled it because my episode was so bad. And now I currently see a primary care doctor for my CVS, I see a neurologist, and I see a GI doctor. The GI doctor was basically to rule everything else out, to make sure it wasn't Crohn's disease, it wasn't celiac disease, to make sure it wasn't anything like that. And the GI doctors have found nothing. I actually had a gastroemptying study done to make sure that I didn't have gastroparesis as well, and I'm still waiting on those results. But my CVS gets so bad. There's times that I don't know how I'm gonna do it, honestly. I can't function. I'm choking on vomit. It's awful, and I don't wish it on my worst enemy. But my daughter's getting a little cuddly, so I think she's gonna go to sleep. So this is it for part 1 of the video. I'm gonna try to make a part 2 here later on as soon as I get my daughter down for a nap. So bear with me, guys. I have more to the story.